I never expected much from that party until I saw her. A woman standing quietly at the edge of the room, smiling as if she carried both sorrow and grace in the same breath. And when she looked at me, everything else seemed to fade, until her voice broke the silence. Dance with me. The party had been going for hours by the time I arrived, though I could tell from the laughter and the empty glasses lining the tables that most people had settled into that easy rhythm where conversations flowed freely and inhibitions softened. Music spilled out from the speakers in the main room, too loud for my taste, but just soft enough that no one could really complain. I've never been the center of the room type. The dance floor, the flashing lights, the chorus of voices, those belong to other people. Instead, I drifted toward the edges, where the shadows were softer and conversations carried in half-whispers. It was there, leaning against a doorway with a half-finished drink in my hand, that I first noticed her. She wasn't doing anything dramatic. No loud laughter, no extravagant gestures to pull attention her way. If anything, she looked as though she'd been placed there by accident, alone near a tall window, her glass of wine cradled lightly between her fingers. Yet the way she carried herself made her presence undeniable. The black dress she wore wasn't flashy, but it suited her perfectly, elegant without trying, falling in soft lines that hinted more than they revealed. The golden light from the chandelier above touched her hair in subtle highlights, like embers catching in the dark. She moved her head slightly, scanning the room, and for a moment I thought she looked detached, like someone who had been invited but not entirely included. There was something in the way she held her glass, steady, deliberate, that made me think she wasn't new to these kinds of gatherings. She had the air of someone who knew how to wear composure like an armor, even if she'd rather be anywhere else. And yet, there was no bitterness in her expression. If anything, there was a quiet grace, as though she had learned long ago how to let the noise of the world move around her without disturbing her center. Every so often, someone would pass by her with a polite smile, perhaps a small word exchanged. She would return the gesture with the faintest tilt of her lips, but then the other person would be swept back into the river of chatter, leaving her untouched. And I found myself wondering, was she waiting for someone? Or simply content to exist on the edge of things, as I often did? That thought stirred something familiar in me, because even in a room filled with laughter and music, she seemed to belong to the same quiet I did. There was a stillness about her, and it drew me more than any burst of noise or glamour ever could. As the night pressed on, I became aware of her in the way one becomes aware of a melody beneath the song, the subtle presence that changes everything without demanding attention. And though I tried not to stare, my gaze returned to her again and again, each time catching some small detail I hadn't noticed before. The way her thumb traced the rim of her glass, the soft composure of her shoulders, the unspoken weight behind her calm expression. It was in that quiet space, before a single word had passed between us, that I felt the pull begin. You can. I don't remember how long I spent simply watching her from that distance. The party had its own rhythm, waves of laughter, bursts of clinking glasses, the occasional song shift that sent a new energy across the room. But beneath all of it, there was her. She didn't have to move much. She commanded attention and stillness, though not in a way that suggested she wanted it. At first, I was careful not to let my gaze linger too long. It's easy to misread interest at gatherings like this, and I didn't want to cross that line. Still, I couldn't help it. Every time my eyes wandered the room, they somehow circled back to her. And then it happened. She looked up. For one heartbeat, I thought she was glancing around the room like anyone else might. But then her eyes found mine, and stayed there. It was nothing like the quick, accidental glances exchanged by strangers. Her gaze was steady, deliberate, and to my surprise, not the least bit guarded. I felt something jolt through me, small but unmistakable, as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet. My instinct was to look away, to pretend I hadn't been watching. But her expression stopped me. She smiled. Not the polite curve of lips people give when they don't know what else to do. No, this smile was different. It was soft, yes, but it carried something more. Recognition, almost. As if she'd been aware of me too, in her own quiet way. It's hard to explain what that moment felt like. The room didn't go silent, not really, but the noise dulled to a background hum, as though my attention had narrowed to her, and only her. The warmth of that smile traveled further than it should have, settling somewhere deep in my chest. I wondered if anyone else noticed the exchange. Probably not. It was too small, too private, like a note passed between two people in the middle of a lecture hall. But to me, it carried weight. It was as if she'd said without words, "I see you, even here, even now." I didn't know what she saw when she looked back at me. A stranger, younger by more than a few years, lingering at the edges of the party? Or perhaps she noticed the same thing I had noticed in her, that sense of being present without truly belonging to the noise around us. She didn't look away. Not immediately, anyway. Her smile lingered, reaching her eyes, softening them in a way that caught me off guard. And when she finally did turn her gaze back to the crowd, it wasn't hurried. It was unhurried, intentional, as if she knew exactly what she had given me. A thread of connection, fragile but real. I found myself standing straighter, my drink suddenly heavier in my hand. It was a simple exchange, nothing spoken, nothing promised. Yet my pulse beat faster than it should have, because in that fleeting moment, I felt seen. And that was enough to change the entire night. The music shifted. One song faded into another, something slower, something with a steady rhythm that seemed to settle over the crowd like a blanket. The voices around me softened, the laughter easing into murmurs. It was as though the whole room had drawn in a breath together. I had just convinced myself to stay in the safety of the shadows a little longer when I noticed her moving. She set her glass down on a side table, her fingers lingering for a moment at the stem, as if she were letting go of something more than just a drink. Then she stepped forward, toward me. I tried not to react, though I'm certain my heartbeat gave me away. My chest felt too tight, my palms uncomfortably warm against the glass I was still holding. She crossed the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had no need to compete with the noise around her. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, and yet it left me feeling like the floor had tilted beneath me. When she reached me, she didn't say hello in the usual way, didn't make small talk to bridge the gap between strangers. She simply tilted her head, a hint of amusement in her eyes, and said in a voice that was both playful and calm, "Dance with me, if you can." The words caught me off guard, not because of the request itself, but because of the way she said them. Not as a command, not as a challenge, but as though she already knew my hesitation and chose to meet it with kindness. For a second, I hesitated. Every thought I'd had earlier about being an outsider at this party, about the eyes that might turn our way if we stepped into the center, pressed against me. She must have seen it in my face, because her smile deepened just slightly, reassuring, as if to say, "It's just a dance. No one else matters." I set my glass aside, my fingers brushing the table awkwardly. Then I reached for her hand. The first thing I noticed was how warm it was, how steady her grip felt. Not tight, not insistent, simply certain. Her skin was soft against mine, her touch carrying an ease that instantly unraveled some of my tension. She led me toward the center of the room. Though she didn't pull, it was more like she gave me space to follow, trusting I would. The people around us seemed to blur, conversations dimming beneath the low thrum of the music. And then we were there, facing each other beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. She lifted her chin slightly, eyes never leaving mine, and waited for me to place my hand at her back. The fabric of her dress was cool satin beneath my fingertips, smooth but alive with the warmth of the woman it touched. As I settled into the rhythm of the song, I realized this wasn't about perfect steps or performance. It was about her closeness, the unspoken dialogue in the way her body leaned just slightly toward mine, inviting without demanding. I breathed in, steadying myself. She had asked me to dance, and I couldn't remember the last time something so simple had felt so important. The music wrapped around us like a tide, slow and steady, carrying us into the center of the room. For a moment, I was aware of people watching, curious eyes glancing our way. But the moment she turned fully toward me, the rest of the world faded into a distant blur. I placed my hand lightly against her back, the satin fabric cool beneath my fingertips, though the warmth of her body rose through it almost immediately. She rested her other hand in mine, her fingers relaxed but firm, as though she was giving me both permission and trust in a single gesture. We began to sway. At first my movements felt stiff, uncertain, half of me worried about stepping on her toes, the other half caught between the strangeness and wonder of being this close to her. But she had a way of guiding without ever taking control, shifting her weight so naturally that I found myself following her rhythm as though it had always been mine. "Do you like this song?" she asked softly, her voice threading through the music, low enough that only I could hear it. I nodded, though in truth I couldn't have named the song if someone had pressed me. All I knew was her voice, the calm cadence of it, grounding me more than the beat itself ever could. Her shoulder brushed against my chest as we moved, a small contact that sent a quiet charge through me. She wasn't pressed close, but she wasn't distant either. She kept us in that perfect in-between space, close enough for awareness, far enough to hold a tension that neither of us seemed eager to break. The scent of her perfume rose subtly with each turn, something floral with a deeper undertone I couldn't quite place. It clung to the air between us, weaving itself into the memory of this moment before it had even finished happening. I found my breath falling into rhythm with hers. When she inhaled, I did too. When she exhaled, my chest seemed to mirror it. The music became less about steps and more about the small, wordless conversation of two people moving together. I risked looking down at her then. Not just at her, but into her. The delicate lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of years lived fully. The curve of her lips that carried both composure and something softer, something that almost looked like joy. She met my gaze without hesitation, holding it for a moment longer than most people dare in the middle of a crowded room. The connection was silent, but it was undeniable. "You're doing fine," she murmured, amusement flickering across her features. Her hand gave mine the gentlest squeeze, not corrective, not commanding, simply reassuring. And just like that, I felt myself loosen, the awkward edges softening into something that felt almost natural. I realized then that this wasn't about the dance at all. It was about her closeness, about the way her presence steadied me even as it unsettled me. Each brush of her shoulder, each shift of her hand, carried more weight than the music ever could. And as the song carried us forward, I stopped thinking about steps entirely. I simply followed her, her rhythm, her breath, her quiet gravity, into something that felt like it had been waiting for us all along. The song ended, but neither of us moved to leave the floor. The crowd shifted around us, some clapping softly, others pairing off into their own conversations. A faster song threatened to begin, but the DJ must have sensed the moment, because instead, another slow tune drifted in, softer than the last. We stayed. Her hand was still in mine, her other hand resting lightly against my shoulder. I felt the warmth of her through the fabric, steady, grounding. She didn't speak at once. Instead, she closed her eyes for a breath, as if letting herself sink into the music, or maybe into the silence we carried between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as though she wasn't sure whether the words belonged in the noise of a party. "I haven't done this in a long time," she said. "Not since," she trailed off, her gaze slipping to the side, past the lights, past the crowd, as if searching for the courage to finish. I didn't press. I simply kept swaying with her, giving her space, my hand holding hers just firmly enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "Not since my husband passed," she said at last, the words leaving her in a hush. Something inside me shifted. Not pity, never that, but a kind of reverence, a sudden awareness of the weight she carried even as she smiled, even as she stood here with me. I understood now why her presence felt layered, why her smile earlier had carried both light and shadow. "I'm sorry," I said softly, though the words felt too small, too thin for what I meant. She gave a little shake of her head, as though brushing the apology away. "It's been 2 years. People tell you it gets easier. And maybe it does, in some ways. But sometimes, at moments like this," she glanced around, her eyes catching the glow of the chandelier before returning to mine, "you feel the absence more than anything else." Her fingers tightened slightly around mine then, not desperate, but deliberate. A choice. I didn't try to fix her pain. I didn't have the right. Instead, I let my thumb trace the back of her hand, slow, steady, a gesture that carried no solutions, only presence. She looked at me then, her eyes shimmering but not breaking. "I wasn't sure I'd even come tonight. I thought, what's the point of parties, of music, of dancing, when the person you once shared them with is gone?" And yet, she drew in a breath, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Here I am." I felt something tighten in my throat. "And here I am too," I said. For a moment, She didn't answer. Instead, she let her forehead rest lightly against my shoulder, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin, the gentle weight of her leaning. It wasn't dramatic, not a collapse, not a breaking. It was simply trust, placed quietly in my care. I closed my eyes, listening to the faint steadiness of her breath against my chest, and thought, this closeness, this honesty, was more intimate than any kiss could have been. The music carried on without us, but after a while, I felt her shift slightly in my arms. Not pulling away, not breaking the moment, but adjusting, as though she needed space to breathe again. I loosened my hand from hers just enough to let her choose. "Would you like some air?" I asked quietly. Her answer came as the faintest nod, her lips curving in a small, grateful smile. Together, we stepped off the dance floor, weaving through the crowd, though I hardly noticed the people anymore. Their laughter, their conversations, all of it blurred into background noise as we moved side by side. The hallway to the garden was dimmer, quieter. Each step felt like we were leaving the noise of the world behind. When we finally pushed through the glass doors, the cool night air met us instantly, brushing against our skin like a sigh of relief. The garden was strung with small golden lights, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. The faint hum of crickets carried beneath the distant thrum of music from inside. The contrast was almost startling, the difference between the crowded warmth of the party and this quiet, open space. She crossed her arms loosely, drawing in a slow breath. "Much better," she murmured, tilting her face toward the night sky. The moonlight touched her features gently, softening the lines of her expression, making her look at once timeless and achingly human. Without thinking, I slipped off my jacket. I didn't make a show of it, didn't ask permission. I simply draped it over her shoulders, letting the fabric settle against her arms. Her eyes shifted to mine, wide with surprise for just a moment, then softer. She adjusted the jacket around herself, her hands brushing the sleeves where my arms had been. That small touch lingered longer than it needed to, as though she wanted to feel not just the fabric, but the echo of me within it. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, almost tender. I shrugged lightly, though my chest felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the air. "You look like you might need it." She studied me then, not hurriedly, but with the kind of gaze that seemed to search past the surface. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again, as though the words she considered didn't quite belong. Instead, she took a step closer, closing some of the space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with something unspoken, something that hovered just beyond reach. Her perfume, faint now, mingled with the cool night air. The closeness of her presence pressed gently against me, not in touch, but in awareness. I wanted to say something, to tell her how I'd noticed her stillness across the room, how her smile had undone me, how this night felt different because of her. But the words seemed clumsy compared to the silence we shared. So instead, I simply stood with her, the soft glow of the garden lights casting shadows around us, her shoulders wrapped in my jacket, her eyes meeting mine with a depth that left me unsteady. And in that stillness, I realized, sometimes the most profound moments don't need words at all. We lingered in the garden, neither of us hurrying to return inside. The laughter and music from the party floated faintly through the glass doors, but it felt distant now, like an echo from another world. Out here, time seemed slower, quieter, softer. She held my jacket closed at the front, her hands clasping the lapels as though it offered more than warmth, as though it was a shield or a comfort. Her gaze drifted toward the golden lights strung above us, but after a moment, she turned back to me. "I didn't expect this," she said softly. Her voice carried something layered, gratitude, wonder, and maybe a touch of fear. "Neither did I," I admitted, my words slipping out before I had time to measure them. Her eyes held mine then, steady and unflinching. "I thought I'd come tonight, smile politely, and leave early, go back to my quiet house, pour another glass of wine, and carry on as usual." She paused, her lips curving in the faintest trace of a smile. "But instead, I ended up here. With you." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm glad you did." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of the things we didn't yet know how to say, and maybe didn't need to. She shifted closer, not much, but enough that I could feel the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I hesitated. The line between what was safe and what was too much felt impossibly thin. She seemed to sense it, because she moved first. Her fingers slipped lightly over mine, resting there without pressure, as though giving me the choice. I let my hand turn, my palm opening to meet hers. Her skin was warm, her grip gentle, but the connection was steady enough to make my chest tighten. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "For not treating me like a story to be pitied. For just being here." I shook my head slightly. "You don't need pity. You need someone who sees you." Her lips parted, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then, instead of words, she leaned forward. Not with urgency, not with hesitation either, but with the kind of certainty that felt earned. Her lips brushed my cheek, light, unhurried, lingering just long enough to leave warmth behind. The touch was tender, not about desire, but about trust. About choosing this moment, choosing me. When she drew back, her eyes searched mine, as if waiting to see what I would do with what she had given. I didn't move closer, didn't push the moment into something it wasn't. I simply held her gaze, letting the quiet promise between us settle where it belonged. Unspoken, but undeniable. The garden lights glowed softly above us, the night air cool against my skin, her hand still folded in mine. And in that stillness, I knew, whatever this was, whatever it might become, it had begun. Not with a grand declaration, not with fireworks, but with a smile, a dance, and a promise carried silently in the way she looked at me. If this story touched you, let me know by leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more slow burn romances like this one, don't forget to subscribe and join me for the next story. Your support helps keep these moments alive. 8.